Well, throughout tennis history, some matches have just stood out from the rest as absolutely legendary. And on this episode of the Front Row Show, we're going to be talking about some of the greatest matches of all time, your favorite matches of all time, as selected by you, the Front Row family. And now, as this is being recorded in the difficult times of the COVID-19 crisis, I thought it would be appropriate to release this Front Row Show, which is usually only for the supporters on Patreon who make the slice run. We're going to release it to the public to give support and extra tennis content to the people who are locked up in isolation right now around the world. So I'm sure the Front Row people will understand, and I would love to welcome the entire tennis fan audience to this special episode of the Front Row Show, where we're going to be talking about the greatest matches of all time, according to the Front Row family. So they've nominated the matches. I've went back and watched highlights from them all, looked at the stats, looked at the settings, looked at why they were so special, and now we're going to talk about them. So I'm super excited for this. Thank you for supporting us, people on Patreon. You guys make a huge difference. If you are interested in seeing more of the Front Row Show, for those of you who are just watching, you can get on the Front Row Show by clicking the link below. It takes you to the Patreon. We do videos like this all the time. They're inspired by the fans, and then we talk about it as a community. And on this episode, like I obviously said, we're talking about the greatest matches of all time. So without any more ado, we're going to get into it. The first match I'm going to start with is one that you should all know by now, as voted on by Charles and Goldwolf, two faithful members of the Front Row family. And that is, you all might know it as the greatest match of all time, the Wimbledon 2008 final, where Nadal defeated Federer 6-4, 6-4, 6-7, 6-7, 9-7. Now, this match is historic, and it's still arguably the greatest match of all time, and for obvious reasons. To me, the setting kind of set up what this meant for so much. So I'm a Federer fan, foremost, so watching this match always hurts me. But if you're a Nadal fan or a tennis fan in general, it was so significant for many reasons. Starting with the setting. In 2008, Federer had been dominating tennis since the end of 2003, literally absolutely dominating, just being the best player on earth by far, and it wasn't even close. There was a young man named Rafael Nadal who had won the French Open in 2005, 6, and 7, and made the finals of Wimbledon in 2006 and 7. So he was nipping at the heels of Federer, who is the dominant number one player in the world. And 2008 especially was a particularly rough year for Federer because he had mono over the break at the end of 2007 into 2008, and he said that took away a lot of his fitness and confidence. He lost to Djokovic in the quarterfinals, I think, of the Australian Open, and then he lost a bunch of matches in the Sunshine Double and the clay court swing, and then he got absolutely destroyed by Nadal in the 2008 French Open final. Now that set the stage for Federer to have a weakened confidence in his palace, the Wimbledon, where he'd won in 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7. He was going for his 6th in a row. So they come into this match with Federer trying to hold on to his crown and Nadal challenging for it, trying to prove to the world that he's not just a clay court specialist, that he's an all-court powerhouse. And in this match, Nadal just had so much energy. He was still a beast from the baseline, and it was an absolute duel. This match had such a high quality because you had, power and precision. The young kid from Mallorca, the clay court player, transferring over to grass to challenge the king of grass at the time. And it was just this duel for the ages. Rafael Nadal wins the first 2 sets, so then Federer's down. The 5-time defending champion is down, and they're thinking, is this it? Then he wins a tiebreaker. And then Rafael Nadal fans start getting nervous. And then he wins another tiebreaker. The 4-set tiebreaker was all time. That's the thing I've seen most from that match, actually, because it was such an epic tiebreaker, with Federer winning that tiebreaker at the end. But then you kind of forget that he ends up losing the match, 9-7 in the 5th set in epic fashion. It came down to the wire. It was getting dark. It was such a late match. And when Nadal won, he fell to the grass, and it kind of seemed just like, and when the guy said it, it's a changing of the guard. There's a new man at the head of men's tennis. So such a euphoric win for Nadal and such a heartbreaking loss for Federer. You could really see their mutual respect, though, when they got to the net and just handshaked. And it was epic. It was absolutely epic. For Nadal, a career-defining win in his career, because he transferred over away from clay, won on grass, Wimbledon, the most prestigious of all the majors, and showed that he's really an all-court player. Then he obviously went on to win the Australian Open and the US Open different times, and the rest is history, obviously. But this is where Nadal really stepped up as an a rival to Federer, an equal with Federer at that point. Amazing victory for Nadal, brutal loss for Federer, and this kind of the setting of where that was at in tennis history kind of was a part of why the Wimbledon 2008 final is arguably the greatest match of all time. And that's why it's Charles Goldwolf's, and I'm sure mine, and many other players' one of their favorite matches of all time. And next we move on to a favorite from Charles, the 1984 French Open final between Lendl and John McEnroe. So this one I had to turn back the history books and I had to go do some history. I watched part of this match and we got into it. So Lendl defeated John McEnroe 3-6, 2-6, coming from 2 sets down, 6-4, 7-5, 7-5. And now what was significant about this match is that McEnroe was like the best player in the world, and he had a 2-set lead, and he was up a break in the 3rd set. And then, like, to put it in perspective on how good McEnroe was at the time, McEnroe in that year went 82-3. 82 wins, 3 losses. This was one of his losses. He only lost 2 other matches in the entire year. So for those of you who think that, the years recent, like 2011 Djokovic, 2006 Federer, 2004 Federer were the most dominant years of all time, this is going to be right up there with that. So John McEnroe was the best player in the world, and then he was coming back hard, or he had a big lead. But then Lendl just grinded him out. He was absolutely unstoppable from the baseline. Johnny Mac liked to come forward, use his hand skills, which were insane. Volleying skills back then with all those players was so much better than it is today. Like the hand skills are so much higher. Like, is John McEnroe the greatest volleyer of all time? I don't know. It's kind of funny because he's a commentator obviously now, and I feel like he's like kind of the jokester, the prodster. Everyone else is a little bit more even keel than he is, and that kind of makes you think that he doesn't know his stuff as much. But we all forget that at one point he was the best player in the world. For sure. He's one of the all-time greatest tennis players. And in this match, you can see how good his net skills are. But what Lendl started to do was starting to lob him and change it up. So he'd come to the net, get ready to pounce on it. Lendl would do these lob shots, and it just really worked on McEnroe. Lendl was a bit more the Iceman. McEnroe was more fiery, and it was that epic battle again. Lendl had lost 4 slam finals coming into this match in a row. He hadn't won one, but somehow he was able to hold on and win this match, and it was an amazing victory for him, obviously. And apparently after this year, McEnroe was never really the same. That was a brutal loss for him, being up 2-0 and then losing, obviously. So that was an epic match. I can see, Charles, why that's one of your favorite matches, because going back to that, if you're watching during that time, there's so many great players, but this would have been such a good rivalry, and this match would have been just epic to watch. And then we move 5 years ahead of that at the same tournament, the French Open. But this time it's not in the final. It's in the 4th round, where Michael Chang defeated the guy we just talked about in Ivan Lendl. Now, Darren puts this match forward as one of his favorites of all time because of, I'm assuming, I think Darren's American. Michael Chang was American, and the way that he did this, he was 17 years old at the time. For you youngins here who are watching who don't know as much about tennis history, like myself, I had to school myself. 17 years old, the youngest Grand Slam champion in the men's game of all time at that point. And he had to come from behind because he lost the first set, but just the way he did it was incredible. And what it meant to him at that point was incredible. So he was Taiwanese, apparently. He's Taiwanese-American parents. But during this time was the Chinese Revolution. There was in Tiananmen Square, the student revolt, and a lot of people died in that. And he said that he felt like he was fighting for those people in this match, especially when he was down. He felt like quitting at a certain point. So Michael Chang's style he was like a grinder. He didn't have a huge serve at all, but he grinded Ivan down and made him super frustrated. But he started to cramp and get physically worn down. He wasn't used to playing these many matches, maybe, because he wasn't one of the top players at that time. Wasn't one of the top 5 guys or whatever. He was used to going super deep. But he was like cramping, and at one point he actually started to walk to the umpire to retire. And then he had this inspiration that he's like, what am I doing? If I quit now, I'm going to quit again in the future, and I'm not going to be a quitter. So he went back, kept making Ivan Lendl frustrated, and pulls out this insane victory as a 17-year-old. But what's even more incredible than beating Ivan Lendl for me with Michael Chang, looking back into this, and thank you, Darren, is that he went on to win the tournament. He went on to win quarterfinals, semifinals, and beat Mats Wilander, I think, or Stefan Edberg, I can't remember, in the final. So he backed that victory up with an amazing run to win his only Grand Slam ever. Like, you never see that. The only other time I can remember that in recent memory is Juan Martín del Potro winning the 2009 US Open, beating Federer in the final after destroying Nadal in the semifinals. He backed it up with another victory over an amazing player. That almost never happens. We see team beat Nadal at this year's Australian Open, then lose to Djokovic in the final. Like, they always win one and then lose, it seems. They can't really back it up and actually win. But Michael Chang did this at 17 years old with no big weapons. Ivan Lendl was a powerhouse. So, absolutely crazy match. And thank you, Darren, for pointing that out, because in the fourth round match, he also pulled out that underhand serve, which friend of the show, Beckett Chung, likes to use, and obviously Nick Kyrgios. So, epic match. Easily, I can see why it's one of your favorites of all time because of everything that was tied in there. It was just an amazing time. Next, we have another one from Darren. It's another classic. It's actually this match right here between Bjorn Borg and Johnny Mack. Johnny Mack was actually using this racket, literally the Dunlop, the Johnny Mack edition, in the 1980 Wimbledon final, where Borg beat McEnroe 1-6, 7-5, 6-3, 6-7, 8-6. Another five-setter, another epic match, fire and ice. There's been movies made about it. Everyone knows Borg McEnroe. Borg was a Swedish guy, just ice cold, grinder from the baseline, super good. And then there's McEnroe, who liked to come forward, play the angles, be fiery, and obviously he was a spaz on the court. They called him Super Brat. And in this match, it was generally known as the greatest match of all time until the 2008 final, Wimbledon final. And there's spooky ties between these two matches. So, for example, the 4-set tiebreaker might be known as the greatest tiebreaker of all time. Johnny Mack saved 5 championship points in it, just with crazy shots, returns, scary resemblance to the 2008 final, because in the 4-set there, Nadal had a crazy passing shot to set up match point, and then Federer had a crazy passing shot to save match point. And then the same type of things were happening in this match like 8 years before. So this was also Borg's 5th Wimbledon in a row. He denied McEnroe, who's coming onto the scene as the next young guy, and McEnroe won the Wimbledon the next year, the Wimbledon. But anyways, it's just such a vintage classic match, and you can see why. If you go back, young guys, all you young fans, go back and watch it. You'll see why. See the amount of volleying, the shot making. They don't have the power, the straight. There's a bit of obviously it was a bit of a different technology back then, but the tennis is just as good, and I can see why the older folks that we have here would appreciate the old tennis and might be bored by some of this new tennis where there's rallying from the baseline endlessly. So that's why it's one of the all-time greatest, because it's between two of the greatest. The level of tennis that was in that match is very rarely been seen in the history books of tennis, and it was between, it was a little bit at the decline of Borg and the rise of McEnroe, and that's why it was so legendary. I can easily see why, Darren, it was one of your favorite matches of all time. Now, we move on to the more recent times as a proposition from Gold Wolf. So, again, trigger warning. I had to trigger warn the Federer fans like myself in that first match that we talked about. I'm trigger warning the Nadal fans in this match, because this is the 2012 Australian Open final where Djokovic beat Nadal 5-7, 6-4, 6-2, 6-7, 7-5. Now, I remember this match as being the most physically demanding match maybe ever. It's the longest Grand Slam final at 5 hours and 53 minutes in history. And it was just like the most physically epic final ever. It was back and forth. Two guys who love to stay on the baseline and just rip balls. And Djokovic, also coming into this, there was a lot of history as well coming into this, because Djokovic in the year before, in 2011, had absolutely dominated Nadal. He beat him in all 6 of their matches that they had played. So in a weird connection to what happened in 2008, Federer was the guy at the moment, and Nadal was coming up and was giving it to him all of a sudden. At this point, Nadal was the guy. In 2010, it was Nadal's year. And then in 2011, Djokovic came on and just absolutely gave it to Nadal. And then in 2012, Nadal was holding on and Djokovic was overtaking him. And there was just so much mental pressure on Nadal, and Djokovic was the challenger. And there's just that integration there. So Nadal was even up 4-2 in the 5th set, which I know Nadal fans probably pains you to remember. He got up, he went up a break, and then he got broken right back. And then they both were just totally gassed by the end, collapsing on the court. Djokovic wins, rips off his shirt. And when they're both sitting there waiting for the trophy, they're both almost collapsing. Like, they can't even stand. It was unbelievable. It was an unbelievable show of what modern tennis can be like with the slower courts and these guys who are so powerful and strong from the baseline. So that obviously makes sense that it's up there in your favorite matches of all time because it's just so epic and it was just such a long match, such a grueling match, and it showed these two guys, I think, at their best, their physical bests. The 2012 Australian Open final where Djokovic wins. So that was that. Thanks for the suggestion, Go Wolf. Obviously, it makes sense that it's one of your favorites. So those are 5 of the best matches of all time and favorites from our family here. But there's one more, and that's my personal favorite match, along with, it seems like, Dominic Lowe, who suggested another match, to be honest, with Nishikori and Pablo Carreno Busta, which I couldn't review because, honestly, neither of those, I know you're a Nishikori guy, neither of those guys are all-time greats, and I'm not a huge fan of either of them either. So, I really couldn't add that. It would feel almost disrespectful to add that match in with all these great matches, but I understand, I appreciate that it's one of your favorites, but I can't review it on this show because this is only for epic, monumental matches between epic, all-time GOAT players. And the Australian Open final in 2017 between Federer and Nadal, especially as a Federer fan, wrapped up a lot of history in this final, where Federer defeated Nadal 6-4, 3-6, 6-1, 3-6, 6-3 in 5 sets. People didn't think he could do it because coming into this match, Federer was coming off 6 months off, and so was Nadal. Their rankings had dropped, and they hadn't played well for a long time due to injuries. Coming into this tournament, they both creeped their way through the draw. Federer beats 3 top 10 players on the way, plays a couple of 5-setters. Nadal plays great players, beats Dimitrov in the semifinal in an absolute epic, and they come into this as, Fadal, the golden children of tennis and the creators of the golden age of tennis, into this dream final that seemed like a video game. And at the time, the GOAT debate was in serious contention there, because if Nadal won, the whole thing would have been Nadal's always beaten Federer Federer hadn't beaten Nadal since 2007 in a Grand Slam final, and he would be closer. It'd only be a 2-slam gap. Now it's a 1-slam gap. But this is all kind of post 2017. I feel like that settled a lot of things for a lot of people. And then if Federer won, it would be his 18th slam. It would be his first one since 2012. And just in this final match, though, the level was so high. They kind of traded blows. Like Federer won the first set, Nadal came back, won the second. Federer won the third set, Nadal came back, won the fourth. And then we go to the 5th set where Nadal goes up an early break, and then he fends off 5 different break points. And then it's 3-1. Nadal up 3-1 against Federer in the 5th set, and then Federer switches something. All match long, he'd been playing with the Neo backhand. The backhand where he was going over the ball so much more confidently than he had for so long. And he had taken away that safe space where Nadal would always grind it to his backhand. That was no longer a safe space. Federer was hitting winners from that side and his forehand, and it threw Nadal off. But then in this 5th set, Federer had to activate his God mode and calm his nerve, and he loosened up, and then he all of a sudden just started playing too good, honestly. Those are Nadal's words after the final. He started playing too good. He played loose, and he just broke to go 2-3, held, broke, and held, and that was the match. He came up absolutely clutch and just came down to the wire, double fault. There was so much drama right at the end, and then even on match point, there was a challenge, and then it was over, and Federer won. And as a Federer fan, it was just the greatest victory that I've ever seen of him, because I didn't really start watching. The only Grand Slam I'd seen him win was in 2012 against Murray at Wimbledon, so this is what meant so much at that point, and that's why it's one of my favorite matches of all time, or it is my favorite match. I stayed up literally all night to watch it. The amount of nerves and cold sweats I had during that match, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, was crazy. And for me, that's why it meant so much to me. I want to hear what some of your guys' favorite matches were in the comment section below. Maybe they were talked about in this video. I'm sure they were, because we covered so many great matches. And again, thank you guys all for your support. I'm so grateful to be able to talk about tennis. And right now, currently, it's my only job. So thank you for your support. If you have it within you, check out the Patreon if you can support us. If not, I know it's tough times for everyone around the world. And I appreciate you guys just being here. And hopefully we can provide you some fun videos to watch during this crazy time. Now, so let me know your favorite matches below. Also, check out the new videos we have a new show about sneakers from Beckett called Heat on the Feet, and we got vlogs of us training while we still can out on the courts here in Canada. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, and thank you for being a part of tennis. And we got lots of YouTube time. We got lots of time for Netflix. We got lots of time for YouTube. I encourage you young fans especially, go back, watch the tennis of the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, 80s, 90s. Watch the hand skills of these guys, and it'll help you. It'll make you maybe encouraged to go to the net and practice your volleys, because those guys were insane. I was losing my mind watching Johnny Mac hit some of the volleys. You would never see. Federer's the only guy that could rock with those guys back then. Now, that's what I think. So anyways, those are some of our favorite matches of all time. What are yours? Let me know. Thanks for being here, guys.